Hello and welcome to Winning with No-Till. Here's a series that we're putting together of no-tillers across the province of Ontario and getting some ideas from them on how they're making it work and where changes might be necessary. And so I'm sitting here with Steve Sickle from Glen in Brant County, and we're going to talk about how his no-till system works. So to start off, Steve, let's just talk about the farm. You know, where did it come from in terms of the production system, and where is it now?
Dad was always an inventor and trying new things, and we started no-tilling wheat with an end wheel drill back in the 80s, planting wheat after soybeans, and that seemed to work. So I guess when I got done college, which would be 92, I bought a no-till drill. And my big dream was, hey, why do we need 3 planters? Let's have one. So I mounted a Sickle unit on a no-till drill, and we were planting all corn with that, as well as beans and wheat. That lasted about 3 years. My spacing wasn't good. My emergence wasn't good because of bounce and seed depth. So we changed that. Now I'm back to 3 planters. And they're all fairly precision, other than the no-till drill you see here. It's basically a controlled spill, but it seems to work for wheat and cover crops. But if I could get a more precision drill in the future that would do wheat and soybeans, then I'd probably change and get something a little bigger. It's hard pulling 15 feet once I've got a 20-foot bean planter, which is a Kinsey push-pull, and now I've got a 30-foot corn planter.
And who is involved in the business with you?
I guess it's me and my kids and my wife. My wife's an optometrist, so she's off the farm, but we just stopped Ethan, who's 12, from planting cover crop, so he's my main help now.
You also have some interesting relationships with neighbors in terms of equipment and work sharing as well.
Yep, I share a corn planter with a neighbor, and I share my combine with another neighbor, and I share an excavator with another person. So I've gotten over the pride of ownership in that it's a little more paperwork, but man, I could keep up to date with equipment because of that half price investment. The way it works on the combine is more involved, but I think it works out every year. There's a spreadsheet, and I think I'm paid this past year I paid 58% of the upkeep on that combine for the year.
But when you said you get to keep up, your partners get to keep up as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With half the outlay in cash of buying that piece of equipment. So it makes it a lot easier for that initial investment when you're splitting it down the middle.
So talk a little bit about your crop mix across the farm.
So I'm growing corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay. Most of the hay is a permanent hay crop, and that the hills are just too steep. Like some of the slopes that I'm growing hay on, the tractor actually falls off the slope pretty near. So it has to stay in hay. And I'm managing that hay, and then I'm getting a good crop. I'm doing soil optics or SWOT mapping on it as well to get the nutrients where they need to be, and putting nitrogen on that grass hay as well, and getting a really good crop. So there's no sense in taking it out. This year is the first year I've grown Azuki beans. I've grown some edible beans in the past, but this is the first time for Azukis, and planting everything no-till and most of it plant green.
Where do cover crops fit in?
Cover crops fit in on every acre in this farm. Because I've got beef cows, the home farm is always cover cropped, and that's my source of feed for the beef cows. If we get enough rain during the summer for rotational grazing, I can make it work that I only have to feed the cows for a month to a month and a half over the middle of the winter. Basically, when I'm calving for March, April, they're locked in the yard. So that's when I'm feeding some hopefully crappy hay, or maybe some haylage or something. But most of the time they're grazing.
And Steve mentioned the hills, and they're the hills. You got to see them to believe them. And I wouldn't not get in a tractor combine with him when he was running on some of these hills. But maybe talk a little bit about the soil types and the slopes that you deal with.
We've got some 20% slopes by what the receiver on the combine or the sprayer says. Sandy loam. Back when we were working ground here, we were full tillage with plowing. I was plowing in the fall. We'd have a stone picker and rake. And when we went no-till, that stuff went out the driveway at an auction sale. So we don't need, our first crop every year was picking stones. Now we just run around with a gator to pick rocks.
So you're not dealing with much of the clay soils that Doug and Owen are dealing with east of here?
Not near as heavy. I've got some pieces of heavier ground, but it's not heavy in terms of Haldeman clay heavy, no.
And are you planting on just the sandy loams, or are you planting on some of the heavier soils as well?
I'm planting, everything's treated the same. Just takes a little, maybe more management, and got to be patient.
So you've addressed it a little bit, but essentially, what are the factors that mean that Sickle Farm is in no-till in terms of costs, equipment, time, labor, soil health? What has sort of driven you towards the no-till?
I didn't like picking stones as a kid. I'm not going back to those days. Dad worked the field. I said, just work this spot, and this spot. And I called him up and he was working. Oh, I worked the whole thing. It's like, oh, we were picking stones for days. And that was a cultivator. But I'm in it to pick them once and then they're gone. Not, there they are, roll them. There they are again, roll them. No, pick them. And then roll the ones you missed. I wouldn't be working the acres if I was full tillage. Like now I'm just planting, spraying, and yes, you manage it later on with the sprayer again or with fungicide and stuff. But with full tillage, I just wouldn't do it with all the stones. And now with erosion, we used to have grass waterways. Grass waterways have gone now because now we're getting the infiltration. Basically, the rain goes in where it falls. So we don't have that water rushing down through the field. And if we do get that rain event where you do get the water rushing, I've got the soil health now that it's not going to, I don't get brown soil moving in those rain events. We had a 3-inch rain a couple of weeks ago, and yes, there was water leaving the field, but it was clean. I wouldn't be scared to drink it.
Is that a combination of residue on the surface and sort of better aggregate of the soil, or is it just the fact that there's residue on that soil? Or have you've seen the soils improved in their ability to infiltrate, et cetera?
They've infiltrated. I wouldn't say it's residue because as my soil health gets better, that residue is amazingly fast at disappearing. Like by the time, now if you walk out in a cornfield that was highly full of residue and when I planted it, it's gone now.
As I've gone around the province and talked to no-tillers, I found that some of them have absolutely no tillage in the system at all, and others do have tillage. And really, when you think about it, a planter is a tillage implement as well. So is there any place on your farm, either specific acres-wise or time-wise, when you bring out some form of tillage?
If I tile, it gets tiled. It gets work between the tile or on top of the tile if I can. I just cringe doing full tillage. I had to do some tillage last fall for an archaeological dig. I didn't like doing it, but I was able to get away with doing an RTS pass after soybeans. Some guys wanted it plowed. It's like, I am not plowing this farm. I'm sorry. I just won't do it. My corn planter I almost call it a strip tiller for a planter because it's got a good set of trash whippers that are adjustable from the cab. And it looks like a strip tiller went through when I plant that seed. So yes, that's some tillage. And I've seen some rain events where if you get a big rain after planting, the water will sit on those corn rows, but it doesn't sit in between the rows. So just that little bit of tillage from the trash whipper changes your infiltration. I'm already on team tillage for this fall. We're looking at a bumper crop of corn. I was going to prescription tillage last fall on corn stalks after the corn came off, but because of the high price of diesel last fall, it was nuts. And we were early at our corn harvest with a drought. But in my soybean stand this spring, I still wish I pulled out the RTS pass last fall and just did a little. I've got calmer rolls on my corn head that process the stalks. My theory is corn earthworms don't jump. So let's get that stuff on the ground and get it to rot because a fence post rots out at the ground. It doesn't rot out above the ground. It doesn't rot out below the ground. It rots out at the ground. So let's get this residue on the ground, get it breaking down. And by spring, we can usually deal with it with some trash whippers to get it out of the way to plant, because my bean planter also has a single set of trash whippers on it.
Just talk about, in your no-till system, what is the implement inventory here at the farm?
For no-till or for the tillage side?
Well, essentially for the no-till system.
So as the picture shows, you can see I've got a corn planter with spike closing wheels. Everything's got spike closing wheels now, whether it's beans, corns, or this drill we're sitting in front of. They certainly do help reduce bounce and close that trench in ideal or non-ideal conditions. Trash whippers on the bean planter and corn planter, and downforce management on both the corn planter and bean planter. I don't have downforce management on this. I basically just crank it pretty well. Crank it. I found actually I was running too little a downforce on this drill, and I was wearing out my dogs that go around the depth pins because they were rattling. If I had kept force on them, they wouldn't have rattled and they wouldn't have wore. So I was trying to be on the light side to save the drill, and actually I was being hard on it, not cranking the downforce on this drill. The no-till system, part of that is residue management. The back of the combine. We're running a 35-foot head. Parts of me wish it was 30 foot for the back end of the combine. I did some homework this past winter and figured out that the newer combines have a chopper that spins faster. I've talked to Redicop and some other manufacturers. What can I do to make my factory choppers do better? And they said, you've done everything. I raised the tailboard, raised some things, moved some fins, and I did some homework on the newer combines spin faster. The chopper spins faster. So I checked out the bearings on my combine, same bearings on the newer ones. We were able to switch pulleys to a newer pulley, different size pulley. We machined one side of it to get the belt ribs to line up. So we're going to spin that chopper about 18% faster than last year. So I'm excited to see what that does in my soybean residue to get that out to 35 feet because we are spreading fertilizer.
So as you said, 3 drills or 3 planters, 1 sprayer, 1 combine. How many tractors to run that?
The same tractor gets hooked to all 3 planters. So that's one thing I would like to change. I'd like to get another tractor that Ethan's getting big enough now that he could plant corn or beans on his own. So I could be planting corn or beans get both planters going in the spring. I'm one I try to plant when the ground is fit. So I got caught up. I planted up maybe 100 acres of corn this past spring and I planted 150 acres of beans. And then went back and finished planting corn because that bean ground was ready. I planted a full season hybrid of soybeans that I'll likely plant wheat in because I was in early enough planting those beans that I'll be able to still get wheat in a timely fashion and maximize yield from that full season bean.
So what is the components of that system that make the whole thing work? So, you talked about residue management. What about crop rotation, cover crops? What about the timing? Are you delayed in waiting for that planting every spring and all the neighbors are going? Sort of comment to that.
Maybe by a half a day I'll wait, but typically because now my profile is all ready. Not the top is dry and underneath is soup. Now you dig with a shovel and it's like, hey, top's ready, bottom's ready. So we're not doing that deep compaction that maybe somebody else is doing because my cover crop is removing the moisture from deep down and the surface. Maintenance is key. I see on your list here, maintenance is key. I spend a lot of time in the shop in the wintertime going around a planter. It's not bring the planter in and get it out in a day or two. Go around it. You do chores in the morning, you walk around the planter. Because I got livestock, I'm doing chores. I didn't see that before. Do that at night after supper, walk around. Oh, I didn't see that. And just fixing the little things. The main thing is throw your seed discs out. You think, I'll get a rainy day halfway through planting. Those days never happen. So if the discs are half wore out or 3/4 wore out, they're cheap. Throw them in the garbage, sell them to somebody else on YouTube or on Twitter or whatever. Somebody will buy half worn out discs, but that's not me. I'll put new discs on it. And because you want to cut that residue, you don't want to hairpin it.
And what about the cover crops in terms of how complex is the recipe and when does termination happen or how flexible is that termination timing?
So cover crops are after wheat right now, we're planting it's probably a 6-way blend, but most of it's oats and peas. I think it's 60% oats and 40% peas. We're probably 38 and 38, 58 and 38. And then there's like a pound of sunflowers. There's some crimson clover in there. There's like a pound of buckwheat. Just a couple other things the sunflowers is just for PR. They look cool. And people, hey, and then they start asking, what's a cover crop? And then, you'll plow that down. Actually, no, I won't plow it down. I'll plant directly into it. I won't terminate till I'm spraying all my wheat stubble now to get rid of the volunteer wheat. There's a little bit out there because we don't want that wheat. Winter wheat's got a head start. I think a lot of people miss that. Let's get the cover crop in early. No, wait for the volunteer. As much as you'd think you did a good job of combining, there's still some out there. It's got a head start and it'll choke out your oats and cover crop. Get rid of that wheat, get the cover crop in. And then your cover crop's not quite as big in the fall, easier to break down because I'm going to terminate it in the spring with Roundup and Aragon and plant my corn.
And you mentioned the hill at the front there that you and the boss were deciding on what the timing should have been after the fact. And so how do you set that timing in the spring? Weather, soil, moisture,
The weatherman needs to be more correct. It was supposed to rain, it was supposed to rain, it was supposed to rain. Well, if it did rain and I terminated that crop, I've had a bad experience where if you terminate early and you get wet, that ground does not dry out. Whereas if you got that living crop, it dries it out evenly. So I'm leery because I said it. If I would have sprayed that, then it would have rained.
In a tough year doing no-till, how important is patience? That sort of human thing of patience to making the system work.
You need to be patient, but I think you can be less patient in my system in that you get forgiven somewhat, in that the soil forgives you somewhat because you got soil health and you got a lot more roots to carry if you're going through a wetter soil that'll bounce back, versus if it's a dead soil, let's say, you're going to compact it and beat it up, and that's, you've done the damage.
And talking about soil health, because I know that you're quite keen on that as a concept and practically, do you notice that sort of level of soil healthiness is consistent despite the fact that you have lots of topography across your fields, or does it sort of show up more in one place than the other?
We used to have a lot of water running here when we have rain events. Now I don't see that near as much. Just the lack of erosion is, and I think we're getting better crops on our hilltops than we used to. And the color of the soil. Mm-hmm. Now the soil's black, it's not brown. When you get a handful and you smell it and the way it holds together, we used to think clumpy soil was a bad thing. Now we know aggregates is what we want. And it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. The big eye opener was years ago after here in Ray Archuleta. And we went out Sunday morning after a rain and we were banging the ground, jumping or banging the shovel I had because we need to dig more. And you could hear the earthworms going back in their burrows, physically hear them. And it was deafening. My kids came with me and it's like, after I did it, I was alone that morning. Their eyes got big as saucers. It's like, that's earthworms. It's like, cool. Whereas if you hop the fence and go to some conventional tillage, you don't hear a thing. It's like, that was not one of those aha moments.
Of all of the pieces of the puzzle that make no-till work, how important is the planter?
I think a lot of planters will do the job if they're set up properly. I do custom planting, and I went to another farm to plant, and he was planting another field. And I could see in the distance the planter wasn't set up properly. I told him what to do. It was actually, the planter was running nose down badly. We flipped the drawbar over to get a quick fix in the field. He said, wow. I finished planting the field I was planting for him, and he said, I got another field. I said, I think you can plant that now. He says, I think you're right. And he went and carried on and planted some more no-till with his own planter. A lot of planters will do the job if you pay attention to the details.
What's interesting about the no-till planter of today versus, say, in the 80s is, in the 80s, there was so many different attachments sort of hung on the frames, and now they're pretty stripped down.
I've seen some guys do no-till without trash clippers. I still like getting that trash. I'll call it a slug highway. I've had to replant again because of slugs. It's not fun. Anything I can do to get that soil. Smart farmers have told me we're not warming it. We're not warming it up with tillage. We're drying it out, but we're not warming it up.
Compared to your tilled or conventional tillage neighbors, how does your corn plant, how do your planters differ?
Delta force or downforce management with hydraulics is a game changer. I have access to chicken manure, so I'm spreading my manure, and I can see before. My thinking was my manure spreader before compaction was a thing and making sure your tire inflation is right. But if I planting in through a manure spreader track, I want to make sure I'm to depth. So now I know I am. But the other thing, now we're seeing all the other sins that we do, whether we're pulling logs out of the field in the wintertime, we're seeing all those errors and sins of compaction, or whether it's a grain buggy, you can see those tracks on a dry spring. But compaction got to the forefront, and it's like, now I've got the right tires on the manure spreader. I don't see my manure spreader tracks on my downforce map anymore because of the importance I'm starting to lay on compaction.
When you look at the acreage of no-till across the province, essentially total no-till is like maybe 3% of the acres. Very few people are into total no-till, right? And so now that you've adapted, mostly no-till, probably 80, 90% is no-till. Are there any hurdles that are causing you to suffer relative to the neighbors or whatever that, people should be aware of?
The residue factor, like I mentioned, I'm going to do some prescription tillage this fall. Well, last year I was going to do prescription. This year I'm going to do full on RTS pass in the fall just to get that breakdown happening. But the residue, the slugs, I think reduce stand because of all that residue. That's the one hurdle. So with the cover crops, less is more is too much. Keep that cover crop. It's a cover crop. It's not a crop.
Right.
So we don't need to plant a lot. And I think that's where some people might fail is they want to see a thick stand of a cover crop. It's like, no, a little splattering is just okay.
Now, you mentioned that you have access to manure, so that helps on your fertility side. But oftentimes, fertility management and stratification are issues that people bring up that says, I can't go to no-till. Have you struggled with anything around fertility management as you've sort of made no-till work for the whole farm?
Earthworms are moving my fertility to depth. I'm not concerned at all about moving fertility, keeping all my nutrients on the surface. Everything's getting mixed. When I walk into the field and see all my residue, like you peel back a bean canopy just prior to harvest, it's like, where's my residue? And one thing I look at is my soil. If my soil health and my pH is right, when I'm planting wheat, if I don't see my corn rows, I'm doing things right. Whereas you come across a spot, hey, I can see my corn rows here from 2 years ago. It's like something needs to be addressed.
Another thing that people often are concerned about in terms of no-till is this aspect of delayed planting, slower emergence, uneven crops. Thoughts on that relative to what you see on your farm versus, around the neighborhood, so to speak?
I keep saying it, and I just called a neighbor the other day when I was spraying my beans for fungicide. Remind me next year when I'm complaining about my no-till stand of beans in June to just be patient for a month. Because they always look good. Nobody gets paid for beans and corn in May or June or July. And yes, they look crappier, and then all of a sudden, oh, they don't look so bad. Because they fill in, they thicken up. The conventional beans maybe are more prone to white mold and lodging, where the no-till ones, they catch up and they're not quite as tall, but there's just as many beans. They're just tighter between the nodes. So I just got it. Get a decent stand, yes. Like if you've got an 80,000 stand out there of beans, you're probably going to suffer versus 120 or 130, but you might have the odd thin spot. And what was the source of that thin spot? I saw it this past spring. My thin spots were where my best corn was last fall. So a little bit of tillage in those hollows would have helped.
And when you say that little bit of tillage, you're talking like a straight RTS, like not disc, but blades, and moving straight ahead, not at an angle that are moving a lot of soil.
Yep.
And one pass, essentially?
One pass of a true RTS, just a straight wavy blade, 1 inch and 2 inch wavy blades with a rolling basket on the back.
And how deep?
I'm only putting 200 horse on the front of 24 feet, so I can't go too deep, especially with my hills. Mm-hmm. I pulled the 24 footer with a 44, and I'm probably better off doing that because I know I can't go too deep with it. Your thumb gets sore on the power shift for awfully quickly.
Very good. Okay, so do you feel relative to the neighborhood that you're losing anywhere because you're in no-till in terms of, lower yields, wetter crops at harvest, poorer weed control, any of that?
No, I don't think I'm losing. I actually think I'm getting better weed control. Like my weed is my cover crop, and I know what I'm planting. I terminate that because now a lot of guys don't have a cover crop after wheat, and they let their foxtail or whatever else, their sow thistle go to seed. Right now I'm dealing with volunteer wheat and the odd ragweed, snuff it out, get the cover crop going. Nothing else is out there. My flea bane doesn't seem to be an issue as bad with the cereal riot suppressing it after corn and after beans that doesn't go to wheat. Because I'm a 5-year rotation, corn, soybeans, wheat. So I think the cover crop is, yes, I'm spending money on the cover crop, but I'm saving it on my herbicide bill.
And so your cover crop is contributing to weed control and soil health aspects of the system as a whole.
Absolutely. But it's another management.
Understood.
I'm probably just as busy with cover. I wouldn't be spending a couple days planting cover crop. It's different work.
And you are planting cover crops, not spreading cover crops. And a lot of people complain about the cost of running a drill across the acres, but this makes sure that you get it in the ground.
I'll drill my cover crop after wheat. After soybeans, and after corn, I just broadcast cereal rye.
Even after corn, you're getting that rye in, and it's what is it in like in the spring?
It depends on the kind of winter we get. Sometimes it's a crapshoot. Sometimes it's like this field, why'd it catch in another field, or why'd this part of the field catch and not another part? This year we're going to have an awesome catch of rye because if we're going to spread the rye and then we'll RTS it in. Mm-hmm. So that gets, but I've done that in January. I've done it after SWAC. I've come home the day after SWAC. Soil conditions let me go out and spread it, RTS it in the snow. You don't see it till spring, but come April, it's like, where'd that come from? And it's just as big as the stuff you spread. The year I went to see Soil Smart to hear Ray, I asked Ray after his presentation, what can I do to, he says, go out and spread cereal rye in March. And it worked.
Taking the other side of the coin, where are you winning? Again, what's keeping you in no-till? There must be things that make it for you.
I think my profits are, I'm making money. I'm able to buy equipment, buy some land. Whether it's as much as the neighbors, I'm not sure, but I'm making my operation work. My soil looks darker, so I know that's a positive. I know when we get a big rain event, the water leaving my field is clear versus I'm not contributing to a chocolate brown Grand River when we get those 3 or 4 inch rains, which I just cringe at. It's like the amount of nutrients and chemical that's going down because we blanket apply our herbicides in the spring. Those are leaving too, if they're leaving with with soil. So to me, that's a win. Like the next generation's got to have soil. Farming on a flat land is probably pretty easy compared to my hills.
You and I have been involved in several compaction activities and stuff like that, and you've gone to better tires, lower PSIs, using CTIS systems so you can change your pressures and stuff like that. But do you really need that on no-till ground when it's much better able to carry the equipment than worked ground? Are you still seeing advantage of those types of investments?
It still carries it, but I think we still have the same effect at the 20-inch depth. So with less pressure and a bigger footprint, we're saving our deep compaction. And I want to see my roots go down 2 or 3 feet to get that water in a dry spell and to get those nutrients that are deep down.
Like when I look at these tires on this drill here, they're, I think, about a 750 VF, 710 VF.
No, they're a 480.
Oh, they're 480 VF. And they are squatting. The average farmer would look at that and cringe, but this is what you want to see. And this drill is loaded right now.
It's half loaded. There's no fertilizer in it at the moment, but yeah, they're squatting, and I got to take my time going down the road. The idea is to get the air inflation system that's on a tractor tied into this drill before, I don't know if it's going to happen before fall, but the idea is to save the tires. I could probably even have more squat in them when I'm planting because then I'm under 10 mile an hour. But custom rim, custom tire, talk to your tire guys. They have lots of solutions. The tires that came on this drill were a big tire, but they're nothing compared to what's on it now.
I assume they were a bias tire.
They were a bias. They said flotation on the side, but they were a big turf tire, but a 31 by whatever, but they're not a VF radial.
Very good. Okay, so we're getting very close to the end here. Considering where you are today, would you ever go back other than a little bit of tillage to help you manage some residue?
Well, I'm not going back to plowing. I'm not picking.
Or heavy disc ripping and chisel plowing and that type of thing?
Absolutely not. I got way too many slopes. The soil would leave the farm in a heartbeat. Roots will break my compaction if like a deep ripper. I deep ripped years and years and years ago, back when we were in plowing age, and talk about power and stones. You find every big nugget you got. So a tile plow is bad enough picking rocks after you tile. So no, I'm not going back. What are my next steps? Maybe consolidate a drill and a planter to go get back to 2 planters and maybe get away from 15 feet, maybe, because planting wheat is a timely fashion when you're a one-man show. Ethan's still in school, so I don't have his help during the day. So I got to plant wheat in the morning after the dew's off and then plant wheat late at night after we're done combining. So it's a challenge to try and keep up to the combine with planting wheat. It's kind of it's nice when the wheat's all planted, you can relax to finish planting, combining the rest of the beans.
As opposed to waiting until you're done combining and then try and plant your.
Absolutely not. The wheat has to be planted early.
Very good.
You got to keep the drill caught up to the combine on those bean acres.
Okay, so just to finish up here, do you have any advice to people that are sort of on the fence about, can I do more no-till on my farm? Where should they start? What considerations should they be thinking about?
Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. Sometimes I think it's maybe get a neighbor that's successful at no-till, have them come in and no-till for you. It'd be way cheaper than doing the full tillage on something. Planting it, no-till planting is what, 35 or 40 bucks now? A tillage pass or two. And if you've got a cover crop that you're ripping up and you got that root mass you got to deal with, it's going to dry out, it can go south real quick. Whereas if you hire the neighbor to plant it, maybe that's the avenue. Or do some modifications on your own existing equipment are probably fairly inexpensive versus an all-out trade-in and buy something new. The learning curve, it's a learning curve. I got lots of no-till equipment on this farm that I don't use anymore. That's on the shop floor or in a back shed. I wish I know now what I didn't know back then to save the ouch on the wallet.
And thanks for being willing to share those ouch moments to help others get into it. I think what we'll do is just say thank you very much for sharing your experience and your thoughts with the group here. And if they have questions, I'm sure people will find you on Twitter or elsewhere. And you're currently the president of Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, and quite active in other things. And so no-till has given you some time to do some other things off the farm as well.
Yep. Yeah. Don't be afraid to reach out. I'd rather see someone succeed at no-till and save some soil.
Very good. Well, thanks, Steve, on behalf of everybody. Appreciate you sparing the time with us.
No problem.